हाँ सर स्टार्ट करिए।
Good evening to everybody connected with the virtual academic platform organized by Philosophy Family. Welcome to you all, the fourth day of the webinar series on ethics and applied ethics. It's my honor to extend a hearty welcome to all the dear students, scholars, and river teachers of philosophy, those have raised their support to this program. Friends, due to the endeavor of our convener, Sri Pramod Kumar Das, and coordinators of webinars, uh, we have conducted about 70 webinars for the greater cause of philosophy. Friends, indeed, our students have been benefited a lot out of this webinar series. Philosophy family is grateful to all the teachers of philosophy to have its connectivity with their students during such pandemic period. The pandemic time has given us the opportunity to stand with the students of philosophy and to increase their philosophic wisdom. Friends, today our guest speaker is Dr. Om Naran Rao in the first session. Let me present a brief introduction of his academic pursuits. We have with us also our host and recorder, Mr. Devasi Sarangi. I don't want to give his academic output. Let me start with the academic output of Dr. K. Omnaran Rao, the speaker of the first session. Dr. K. Omnaran Rao has a teaching experience of more than 20 years in different government colleges of Odisha. Dr. K. Omnaran Rao is a brilliant scholar and teacher in philosophy who have already given many webinar series. Uh, Dr. Rao at present working as associate professor and head Department of Philosophy, Niranjana Government Women's College, Aska. Dr. Rao did his MA and MPhil in philosophy from University of Delhi. Then he did his doctoral research on the theme an analytical approach to the concept of reality. Dr. Rao joined in Odisha Education Service in the year 1999 as a lecturer in GM College, Sambalpur. But before joining as a lecturer by Government of Odisha, Dr. Rao served in Punjab National Bank as a bank officer for 1.5 years. Now Dr. Rao is at present working as head of the department philosophy, Niranjan Government Women's College, Aska. Dr. Rao has already authored more than 15 books, which have been very popular among the students of our state and outside the state. It's my pride privilege to recite the names of his books for the academic interest of our students. Some of his books which have gained popularity among the students of our country are Introduction to Applied Ethics, Critical Thinking and Applied Reasoning, Introduction to Gandhian Studies, Introduction to Ethics, Philosophy of Religion, Deductive Logic, Inductive Logic, and the logic book which is meant for Assam board. It has also gained a popularity among the students of Assam. To his credits, Dr. Rao has contributed more than 50 articles to different state and national level journals. Being a life member of Indian Philosophy Congress, he regularly attends different sessions of IPC and contributes his articles. Dr. Rao is also a life member of All Orthodox Philosophy Association and different ethical forums and inspires the young scholars through his discussion. Since the beginning of philosophy family and the webinar series of philosophy, Dr. Rao has been demonstrating his academic excellence in different subjects. Whatever subject is assigned to Dr. Rao, he immediately accepts it and brilliantly presents his lecture before the audience through his extempore speech. Today, he will speak on the topic animal ethics. You know, a good number of animal activists have been working for the cause of animal rights. Although man has been cruel towards animals to fulfill his greeds, still then a section of humanity has raised voice against such cruelty. Today, we are eager to listen from Dr. Rao the ethical reflection behind the topic, behind animal rights. And with this, I would like to conclude giving the introductory speech about Dr. Rao, and I welcome Dr. Rao to start his speech. Welcome, Dr. Rao. Welcome, Dr. Rao.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for your nice words. Respected convener, coordinator, and host of the webinar series, Professor Pramod Kumar Das. The other coordinators of this series, Dr. Kailash Chandra Maharana sir and Dr. Patit Pawan Das. The event recording in charge, Sri Debasis Sadangi, and other members actively involved in this webinar series. And also I should request all the members attending this webinar. I say a big hello to all of them. I should thank the philosophy family for giving me this opportunity to speak on animal rights. It's a privilege for being called by philosophy family to address on this issue. Let's see how the things go on. So, with lot of participants in the webinar series, I hope that this topic would attract a lot of questions during the question hour. Let me try to present myself before that. Animal rights, a great issue to be talked about these days. So, the world in which we live comprises of living beings and non-living things. If we classify the living things, we can classify them into plants on the one hand and animals on the other. We can make a further classification of animals into humans and non-humans. This classification of animals into humans and non-humans is based on the criteria that humans have rationality, they are self-conscious, they are aware of other people around, other things around, which the non-humans lack. So on this basis, we make a distinction between humans on one hand and non-humans on the other. Now you see, if you look into the structure of the living beings, human beings are placed at the top. Now, the questions arise, many ethical questions arise. Now, since the human beings are at the top, whether the human beings have any role and responsibility towards other animals which are down to him, which are of a lower order. The second question is not that the duty of human beings to protect? the various species of animals. Now the third thing that comes to issue is whether the animals have rights. So this is the issue that we are mostly concerned today. Now, addressing the issue, the first thing that comes to being is whether the animals have the right to live. Second, whether animals be considered important like the human beings, irrespective of whether the animals are useful to human beings or not. Now, based on these questions, now we have number of things to answer. The first thing is, why do we subject animals to lot of pain and suffering when we personally do not like to subject human beings to that sort of pain and suffering? Are the non-human species so cheap in the eyes of the human beings that they can be treated the way human beings like them to treat? Now, we cannot kill a human being. We cannot torture a human being. We cannot mistreat a human being. If we do so, it is non-ethical. We treat that as non-ethical, and it is taken also as a crime. But we recklessly torture animals. We kill animals for food. We subject animals to research, bringing about a lot of pain, suffering to the problems, suffering to the non-human species. And this brings in a lot of problems. Now, addressing to all these issues arouses a big question whether a still more partition can be made within the class of non-human animals, whether these non-human animals be further classified. So answering this, some thinkers have come to a point of asserting that within these non-human animals, we can think of a higher order of animals who to an extent are rational, aware of the past to some extent, and also are conscious of what is happening around. So this again arouses the issue of whether these higher order animals be called persons. What are persons? Whom do you call persons? Persons are those beings who are rational, who are self-conscious, who are aware of the past, the present, and also make certain arrangements concerning the future. Are some non-humans be treated as persons? This is the biggest question before us. Undoubtedly, we cannot consider all the non-human animals as persons, yet some of the non-human species may be considered as persons. For instance, the chimpanzees, the apes, say even gorillas, monkeys, etc. may be considered as persons to an extent. Peter Singer informs us that these higher order animals, say chimpanzees, gorillas, apes, etc., if they are given certain sort of training in communicating with their own species or with other species or with human beings, they take the training very seriously, and and on being trained, they communicate very effectively even with human beings. Not only that, after getting the training, these chimpanzees, gorillas, they are found to train even the younger ones, their own children or their own siblings. Okay, so own children, own children, they are able to train. So this shows that they have certain extent of rationality in them. You see, the training has a meaning here. Why do we say the training has a meaning? Because the training is not ending up there. See, not only that these gorillas are able to communicate with human beings, they are also are found to train their younger ones to communicate. So this is how we can say that these higher order animals may be called persons, and they be treated with much more decency vis-a-vis other animals. Or maybe to an extent they may be treated not at par, though not at par with human beings, but very close to human beings. Now, why to talk about these higher animals? We may think of very even lower order animals in the form of, say, birds and various animals. They, by their own voices, their budges, their sounds, they're able to communicate. See, the birds and various animals, they also make certain specific sounds, and on the basis of the sounds, they're able to communicate. Okay, this is how we say. We totally cannot deny they have no reason. We cannot totally deny some sort of reason, maybe I say maybe there, we should not ignore. So this is the point of some thinkers. You see, the way um, the higher order animals behave, and the way some even lower order animals behave, taking this behavior into account, some experiments have been conducted on the higher order animals, and very stunning results have been found in chimpanzees and gorillas that they have remembered certain events of the past, that they have certain expectations in the present, and they have also certain sort of sort of planning for the future. So what does this imply? This implies that the amount, the element of reason, though may not be very much explicit, but the element of reason cannot be ignored in these higher order mammals. So how to take these mammals into account, and what sort of rights that we can ensure for them? That is a big question that we have. Now, we have various kinds of animals. Since some animals are of certain use to us, they are helpful to us, we assign certain sort of value to them, and we also ensure that such animals should not be killed. Okay, even these higher order animals, the gorillas and the monkeys, the apes. Okay, now we should exercise certain amount of reason in us so as to ensure that they are not killed indiscriminately. If at all subject them for experiments, we have to think of them once, twice, in a conscious manner. They should not be used very abruptly, even for research purposes. Now you see, take for instance, we have a human being who is very ill, diseased, and is mentally, say, challenged, or say is mentally, intellectually and mentally he is functionless. Now, we cannot call such a person as a person. You cannot call such a human being a person. Why? if he is mentally ill, or say if he is mentally not able to reason out, if he is not able to think, if he is not able to judge, if he is not able to discriminate between what is right or wrong, if he is not conscious of what he is doing, if you take some sort of human being and compare with a higher order animal of the sort of, say, a chimpanzee or a gorilla, who have consciousness much better than this human being who is considered. Now, even in that case, what we do, we show favor on the human being, even though that human being is intellectually and rationally zero, still we consider that human being and put him in a higher order vis-a-vis this higher order animals. So this sort of discrimination should be how to get rid of this discrimination. We have to look into that. We have to seriously look into that. So you see, these higher order animals, because they have reason, element of reason, though not very much explicit, but still they have reason. They are able to think. They are able to judge. So they are better persons than a mentally or say rationally and intellectually disabled person. So these all considerations bring about a debate as to whether the animals be assigned with certain rights or not. On this issue, whether animals be given rights, the thinkers are divided. Some say, a group of thinkers, they say animals have rights. The other group of thinkers say no, animals say they cannot have rights. Now, what are the judgments, or what are the say justifications that each of them give in support of their claim? So we have two issues in hand. One is animals have no rights on the one hand, and the other hand we have that animals have rights. Now let us look into both of them one by one. First of all, let us look into the issue that animals have no rights. Let us look into the issue that animals have no rights. The people who assert that animals have no rights, what are the justifications that they give? At the first instance, these thinkers assert that rights are derived from our capacity to reason. I repeat, that rights are derived from our capacity to reason. But animals have no such capacity to reason, and hence animals cannot be given the rights. Only the human beings have rights. This is the first thing. The second thing is the notion of rights and duties apply only to human beings. You see, we know that rights and duties are interlinked. Okay, so whenever there is a talk of rights, there is also a talk of duties. Now you see, animals have no duties. Since they have no duties, hence no claim of their rights. Okay. You see, further, rights spring out from our moral nature, which is specific only to human beings alone as moral agents. But since the animals do not have any moral sense, they cannot be said to have rights for themselves. So this is one thing. Now, as there is no moral element in animals, and since they have no capacity of making a distinction between what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is valuable and what is not valuable, okay, so they fail to be moral agents, and also they fail to be as qualifying for having rights. No doubt, no doubt, animals have been of a great importance to the human society and for the human living. We know that animals are hunted for food, their skins, their bones, and various other things of the animals are used for different purposes for the human for the human purposes that they are used. Okay. Now, having said this, the people, the thinkers who deny rights to animals express that there is nothing wrong in killing animals for food or for any other purpose, even including research. They say it is quite natural to kill the lower order animals by the higher order animals. Now, these thinkers think that it is the right of the higher order animals to use the lower order animals the way they feel like. Okay, you see, I have already said you that the higher order animals have a faculty of reason. They are aware of, to some extent, they are aware of the past events. They have certain expectations about the present, and also they have certain preparations for the future. I have said you just now. But for the higher order animals. But let me tell you the following two examples that would suggest that even these higher order animals, they lack the sense of discrimination. They lack the sense of discriminating between what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. So it is hence that the people who deny rights for the higher order animals, this is the reason why the thinkers deny right for even these higher order animals. Take for instance, say, we take for instance here, say, a chimpanzee or a monkey or say, or an ape or a gorilla. Suppose we have something like that. Suppose we place for them two things. One, a banana, and another, a golden ornament. Two things are before, say, a monkey or a chimpanzee or a gorilla. What they will do, they are guided by their instincts. All of us know that they will pick up the banana and they will eat. Even the golden ornament is of much value that we know, they are not able to know that. So this is one example that will suggest why animals are, why human beings are some species, some who should be taken distinct and different from even the higher order animals. This is what the people, the advocates who are against the animal rights suggest. The second example they give is even the higher order animals. If suppose they bear babies and say they are subjected to say suppose they don't get food, the higher order animals, they have beared babies. Suppose new born babies are there, but during that time, suppose say that animal, say in the form of chimpanzee or a gorilla, they don't have what to say proper food. Suppose say food is not there. Now there are instances to suggest that they eat their own children, the young ones. They eat the young ones in order to meet the hunger. So this is again a beautiful example to suggest that why human beings are separate, distinct and different from other animals, and this is why human beings alone have rights and animals do not have rights. Now, on this issue, Aristotle, Aristotle has denied that animals have rationality and moral equality. Aristotle asserts that plants are made for the sake of animals, okay, and the lower order animals are made for the sake of the higher order animals. There is a hierarchy, and in this hierarchy, human beings are at the top, Okay, it is only the human beings who have the right, who can make a claim for the rights, and not the animals, or not the non-human species. Or say even asserts that even the higher order animals cannot be put on the footing of equality with the human beings. If we go to Descartes, he says that animals cannot think and reason, and they also do not feel. They do not have even the feelings. The animals, Descartes says. Descartes says that animals are a kind of natural automata, or say they are like mechanical robots. They cannot feel, they cannot understand, they cannot reason. Okay, they are like robots. They are like mechanical objects. Okay, they are not aware. They don't have, even say they don't have minds. Okay, say they don't have the capacity to feel and understand. And most importantly, one thing that Descartes says is that animals behave in a deterministic manner. Animals behave in a deterministic manner. They lack subjectivity, and also they lack internal reflection. So this is what makes Descartes to assign any sort of rights to non-human species. Because the most important thing that Descartes has said is that animals, they don't have internal reflection. They lack subjectivity. Thus, they behave in a deterministic manner. They cannot reason out, they cannot think out. Okay. So that's, they cannot feel, they don't have the capacity to feel. That's why we cannot think of having rights for animals. This is the position of Descartes. If we come to Kant, Kant says that says both animals and human beings have desires. Animals have desires, human beings also have desires. But the difference is human beings can control their desires. They can sacrifice the desires. If a father may be very hungry, but seeing that the members in the family, they are equally hungry, he will sacrifice his food for the family. Or say the human beings sacrifice their interest for the interest of the well-being of the community or the society. But the desires in animals are instinct based. If there is food, they will think of themselves. Well, I may not generalize, there may be cases of the animals behaving differently, I don't know, but animals are selfish. If there is food, they will go for that food for themselves. Now, human beings can make a choice. They can choose between things. Human beings have a will, and Kant speaks of goodwill that human beings have. And hence, human beings have some sort of intrinsic value. Such sort of value we do not find in animals. And hence a claim for rights cannot be made for animals. Then he again says that animals, Kant says, animals are not self-conscious. The animals are only a means to an end. Animals are only a means to an end is the human beings. Having said all this, Kant says that having said all this, having denying rights for animals, Kant asserts that we shouldn't be cruel towards animals. We should have a very fair treatment towards animals. Because he says those who are cruel to animals, they are also cruel to human beings. Because this is the reasoning that Kant says, the people, if have a sense of cruelty towards animals, they get trained up that way and they behave with such sort of cruel fervor even while dealing with human subjects. So his reasoning is that those humans who are cruel to animals have an element of cruelty getting stronger, and that element of cruelty will get explicit and get expressed while dealing with also the human subjects. So we should be fair in treatment of animals that Kant asserts. Having said this, he asserts one more thing. Since human beings, or since animals are required for, for research activities, for conducting certain experiments, for discovering certain medicines, or for something that is useful to mankind, and if it is helping man in fulfilling the greater interest in saving the lives of a number of men, or in saving the lives of men in general, then animals may be subjected to experimentation, research, and all that. So Kant agrees to that. Now, the next position is given by another thinker that is very important, that is by the philosopher Roger Scruton. Roger Scruton. Scruton, while dealing with animals, he divides animals into three kinds: the pets, and second, the animals which we domesticate for various uses, and the third is the wildlife. Pets are those animals which live with us. Say cats and dogs, they can live in our, they can be with us, they can be in our bedroom, they can be in our living room. So these are pets, say cats, dogs, etc. Now if you take off animals like say horses, goats, sheep, donkeys, etc., etc., they are kept outside. They are meant for, or say camels, they are meant for certain uses. So we do have certain sort of friendly relation with them, but the relationship is sort of a quasi friendship. A quasi friendly relationship that we establish between with them. But friends, but pets are more like friends. They are more like the members of our family. Okay. So the third classification that Scruton makes is the wildlife, and he said the wildlife must be protected. Okay. Now, having made this distinction, he talks of whether animals have rights, whether any sort of claim of rights be made for animals. Now he says, he answers, any claim for rights for animals puts animals into the moral realm, puts animals into the moral realm, the realm of negotiation, and the realm of reciprocation. Now, he says, if animals are to be accorded with the benefits of morality, then they have to take the responsibilities that, like the way the human beings take the responsibility of being moral, which the animals cannot discharge. Animals cannot be taken as moral agents. They cannot reciprocate. They cannot negotiate like human beings. Since animals cannot do these things, they cannot be taken as moral agents, and hence they cannot be given rights. Now, adding to this, still more arguments are given to show that animals do not have rights. In the past, in the medieval ages, Saint Thomas Aquinas has said that animals behave purely on instincts, and human beings behave rationally, or human beings act rationally. Having said this, he also asserts that, the lower order animals are actually meant for the service of the higher order animals. The lower order animals are placed at the mercy of the higher order animals. So it is up to the higher order animals how they treat the lower order animals. This is the position that Aquinas expresses. Now coming to Saint Augustine, he says that by the ordinance of God, life and death of animals are put in the hands of men. It is up to men how they treat animals. This is the position of Saint Augustine. Some Christian theologians, they say animals have no souls, hence they don't have moral rights. But again, this is a controversial issue, whether there is a soul or not. This is a big question to be answered. So, but still, this is an argument that has been put forth by the Christian theologians. Now, I have already said that animals cannot be taken as moral agents. They are not moral. They are selfish. They are physical. They try to meet their own physical needs, even at the disadvantage of the members of the same species or the other species. So the animals cannot be taken to have rights, cannot be granted rights. Now, one more argument that is worth noting is, you see, suppose say, well, this is not a very big argument, but still some say that when human beings kill, certain animals for food, issues are raised. But when the higher order animals, say a lion or a tiger, kills an antelope or a deer, no questions are being raised. Well, this is a very lower order of argument, because they have to live. It is for their food. So these people, they say that human beings are also killing animals for food. So the food is, because human beings do want food. That's why they're killing the animals for food. So if the tigers, lions, etc., they can kill the antelopes or the deers for food. So what is wrong in human beings killing some animals for food? So this is one sort of argumentation that they give. Well, it may be on the weaker side, but this is one of the argument that has been given. Now, I have said it previously, one more argument that has been advanced very seriously, that the concept of right can be assigned only to the persons belonging to a certain moral community. Only the human species are said to belong to a moral community. They have a certain moral code, they have a certain moral pattern, and they behave around, they have to behave. Whether they behave or not, that is a different issue, but there is a certain moral pattern. There is a certain moral code that human beings are made to follow. But that sort of moral code is not there in in the case of animals. Okay, now the non-human animals cannot even pass moral judgments. The moral judgments can only be passed by human beings. This being so, the animals cannot be thought to have rights. Now, some thinkers say, well, if at all the activists are thinking of assigning rights to animals, some thinkers say, well, animals can be thought of one right. What is that right? The right of respectable treatment. That is the only right that we can do. But this is a big right that we can give to animals. If at all we give this right to animals, much of the problems may be solved, I think. Now one more argument that has been advanced is that rights are contractual. Some say that rights are contractual. Only those who enter into a certain sort of contract, that they only can claim to have rights. Non-human animals or non-human species, they cannot enter into contract, and this being so, they cannot have, or they cannot claim to have rights, or we cannot say that they have rights. Well, we can talk of, say, oxen, camels, horses, which have certain duties, and they carry on certain duties for human beings, but still they say that that it is still the people say, or the thinkers say, well, even this will not qualify for them to claim for having rights. So these are the various arguments that have been advanced to justify that animals have no rights. Now come to the position, the opposite position, whether animals have rights. What the people, the thinkers who advocate that animals have rights have in their store to assert. Okay. Now, first of all, they say, if at all we consider ourselves to be moral, we say we are human beings and we say we are moral agents. If at all we are moral, now they say that the following things must be kept in our mind. What are they? They say that human beings should not breed and kill animals for food, medicine, or for research. Number one. Number two, I said research, that is, no experiments should be made on non-human subjects because that brings in lot of pain to these non-human subjects. Now, they say that the animals should not be subjected to hard labor. Number four, they say there should be a total ban on poaching and hunting of animals. They further say that animals should not be used as the objects of entertainment. They should not be made captive and be put in zoos and circuses for the entertainment of human beings, because that brings a lot of pain. Even during the training, a lot of pain is subjected to the animals, and hence we say if we are say moral beings, we should not do these things to the animals. Okay. Now these people, those who say that animals have rights, they say whenever they say that animals have rights, mostly they speak of the higher order mammals. And I have pointed in the earlier part of my lecture that the higher order animals, they have a certain degree of rationality. They are to an extent, they are self-conscious, and this being so, some thinkers, they claim that these higher order animals, they have rights, like the human beings have rights. Now, they give a set of arguments to justify that that even animals like human beings have rights. If you take the higher order mammals into consideration, so what are the arguments that they give? You say, number one, they say the higher order mammals more or less carry a similar biological structure both externally and internally. You see, the biological structure is same or similar to that of the human beings. So these are the things they say that need to be considered while thinking of giving rights to the higher order mammals. Both the higher order animals and the human beings, like the human beings, they are conscious of their existence, the existence of others, the existence of other things around, though the level of consciousness may be very, very less in the mammals. Like human beings, these animals can interact with their own species or with other species. These animals have likes and dislikes, like the way human beings have likes and dislikes. Further, they assert, like human beings, they have also certain sentiments, they have certain feelings, they have certain emotions that we should know. If we consciously look at them, they also carry certain emotions which we cannot ignore. Though the degree may be less, but they have emotions. That is what the advocates for animal rights they suggest. Now, they say, like human beings, the animals also know what is happening around them. It's not that they are just toys. They react. Suppose if you hold a stone in our hand, the dog will run away. So they are conscious of what is happening around. It is not that it's a toy that just stands there, stands still, even though you have a stone in the hand ready to throw at the dog. The dog will either it will run away. So it has a conscious behavior. So it is able to interact with the external situation like the human beings do. So this also makes the claim stronger to assert that even the animals have consciousness. Okay. they also make choices, but the level of choices are very feeble or less or of a not of a great extent. Okay, like human beings, they also desire to live, and they also struggle for their existence. Okay, and they also want to be happy. They don't want to be like human beings. They don't want to suffer. They don't like the suffering like human beings because they also experience pain. Okay, they also feel the hunger, thirst like human beings do. So the people say that the thinkers, the advocates say, why why do we make a distinction between humans and non-humans when these are the number of similarities that we have, that human beings have with the non-human species. Even the non-human species have an inherent value. Tom Reagan, he says that all the entities on earth, living, non-living, everything out there on the earth, most effectively, the living entities, they are a part and parcel of nature. They too carry an inherent value. We cannot deny rights to them. Okay, so these are the various claims that we can make while making a claim for human rights. Now, you see, Peter Singer, an advocate for animal rights, he um, comes very close to assert that the animals, especially the higher order animals, have equal rights like that of human beings. He makes a very big statement, especially concerning the higher order animals. He says these higher order animals have rights very close to human beings. He makes the use of utilitarianism as the basis for claiming that animals have rights. He says that the interests in both animals and human beings carry equal weightage and consideration. Okay, now you see, having said this, he makes an assertion, and even many other thinkers also make an assertion. Even though we talk of duties, the animals have no duties, so they don't have rights. But the advocates of animal rights, they say that nature has given certain duties to the animals. We have to recognize. They have an inherent value in themselves. From the worm to higher order animal, everybody has got some sort of duty, naturally assigned. We don't need to give any duty to them. Take for example an earthworm. An earthworm. Earthworm is said as the farmer's friend. It makes the soil loose. It increases the fertility of the soil. So, consciously or unconsciously, the earthworm is helping the animal. So, it has a natural duty. Okay. Take for instance a honeybee. A honeybee, while collecting nectar from the flowers, it is pollinating. It is helping in the process of pollination. So, naturally it is carrying a work. Though we do not understand, we do not take that into consideration. Peter Singer says that these things need to be taken into consideration. They have a natural duties. He says every organism is friendly to nature, and all the objects, all the entities, they are interconnected, they are interrelated. We should not disturb the harmony. Every entity every entity has rights specific to itself. We cannot disturb that. He says even the microorganisms, say the bacteria, the yeast, the fungi, they have also specific roles naturally. So, in natural terms, every entity on earth has certain specific roles and responsibilities. Now he says, from a utilitarian standpoint, Peter Singer asserts that from an utilitarian standpoint, pleasure is to be maximized and suffering is to be negated or totally be denied. Now, if this is so, then suffering in animals should also be negated or be denied. The animals should not be subjected to pain and suffering consciously by the human beings. We should put an end to the practice of subjecting the animals to a lot of pain and suffering. And he says the right to life of all animals needs to be recognized. It is only then that we can have a happy balance. We can have a pleasant world. Now, Peter Singer
Sir,
says,
excuse me. Hello.
hello, huh?
Sir, sorry to interrupt, sir. Actually, it's 7:06, and I think if we'll conclude within 5 or 10 minutes, then another speaker is there.
In 10 minutes I am completing. Exactly 7:16 I am completing. Okay.
Okay.
Now, so I am touching the important points now. Now, what Peter Singer says is, suffering is important. You just don't think who is suffering, whether a human being is suffering or whether an animal is suffering. Suffering is important. If the animal is suffering, that should be taken with an equal intention as that of pain in a human being. If you are not subjecting the human beings to experiments, to conduct human beings to experiments, if you are not allowing even a diseased human being to be experimented on for medical research, you are not allowing even a mentally blank human being for animal research, even the animals should not be allowed for human research. So this is the position that he says. But later on, we can see that he has changed his position. Okay, now I have to, since I have to make a thought, then I have to, within 10 minutes I'll be completed. Okay. So he says, if human beings get the pain, so also animals experience the pain. So animals should also be taken with much interest and consideration. They should not be negated. Their pain should not be negated. They should be taken with equal consideration. Okay. Now, he says, from a utilitarian standpoint, the final conclusion that he arrives at is, Peter Singer, that even for research, we should not subject the animals to pain and suffering. Now, having taken the utilitarian stand, we see two different positions in utilitarianism on animal rights. We have two views in utilitarianism. One is called as the prior existence view, and the other is called as the total existence view. The prior existence view says, if the killing of animals give more pleasure than allowing the animals to live, then kill animals. But it is found that allowing the animals to live give us more pleasure than killing the animals. So the advocates of prior existence view hold that it is always better, it is always pleasant to allow the animals to live than to kill them. Now coming to, I'm cutting short, okay, because of the paucity of time. Now coming to the total existence view, they say, they justify the killing of animals. What do they say? They say the animal killing is justified, say for food or for research, if you are able to replace the animal. Suppose if you have killed 10 animals, you are able to replace the animals by whatsoever method you may be. Say by breeding, or say by some techniques, by increasing their population. If you are able to negate them, there is no problem. If you are balancing their population, then there is no problem. It is the total existence view. Okay, now, you see, all have reverence for life. There should be a reverence for life. Life is very important. Having said this, we have to sacrifice certain lives for the greater interest of other lives, or a life, or say higher order life. Suppose if there is a standing crop and it is infested by pests, we have to kill the pests in order that the produce of the crop is good. If you allow the pests to grow there, we don't have a good crop there. The crop will be total one. It will be bitten by the pests. So we have to kill the pests.
Conclude, sir.
So, concluding, in 5 minutes I am concluding. Okay, now, Albert Schweitzer, this is the final conclusion that I am coming. Albert Schweitzer, while advocating for animal rights, he says we should take care of three things, 3 R's, while allowing, say, animals for research. The 3 R's are replace, reduce, refine. Suppose you want a certain animal to be subjected to research. Now, without taking that animal, if there can be a computer aided design or computer aided support, or say by some sort of tissue culture, you can carry the same experiment, then don't put that animal to, or don't subject that animal to research. So you should always think of an alternative, whether that animal has to be subjected for research or not. If there is an alternative available in shape of the computer designs, then go for the computer designs or the tissue culture first. Number 2, reduce. Reduce means reduce the number of animals that you subject for research. Reduce the number of animals. So you use the animals for experiments judiciously. You make a pre-planning of what to study in the animals. Since you are allowed to take the animal for research, recklessly don't use animals. You must be very conscious in taking the animal subjects. Recklessly don't take the animals for research. Reduce the number of animals for research. Then refine. Refine is make the experiment to work in such a manner. Make the experiment to work in such a manner that there is less pain and suffering for the animal species. So having looked into these 3 things, we can very much think of, say, protecting our animal life and thinking of their rights. Now you see, even Peter Singer, in the later part of his life, he has even allowed animals for research. Okay, now in one of his interviews, Peter Singer has said that monkeys were taken for research for treating Parkinson's disease. Peter Singer has said, well, he justifies, that has to be taken, certain animals have to be sacrificed for the greater interest of better community or the human community. Now, in the later part of his life, though Peter Singer was against animal research, but in the later part of life, he was supporting animal research. But animals must be taken into for experiments in a judicious manner. So, we should think of animals. No doubt, we are the animals with a reason, and we should use our reason in a manner that less of harm is made to please the animals, or animals are subjected to less pain and suffering if we do that. If you don't use the animals recklessly for research, and you also think of planning for making a shift towards vegetarianism, or we think of caring the animals and thinking of never to torture animals. If we think of reverence for all sorts of life, maybe we can think of rights for animals, and in the process, we especially don't need to think of rights for animals. Naturally, it will come out. If all the thing is, we should learn to behave, learn to think how to behave, how to treat the animals with much care, okay, so that they can also grow along with us without being tortured, without being tortured, without being hurt, without undergoing a lot of suffering. So if you do this, if you treat animals with a lot of care, and maybe we can have a better world to live in, where everybody of us can live harmoniously with one another. Thank you all. Thank you.
So much, Dr. Rao, for your brilliant presentation on animal ethics and on animal rights. You have very intelligibly explored different central issues on this on animal rights, and you have also explored the critical estimate of animal rights, reverence for life, and you have also reflected the historical background and the laws governing animal killing, and you have also at last presented Peter Singer's argument on animal issues. Thanks so much for your presentation. Now your discussion is open for a question answer. Now it's the time for Debashish Sarangi, the moderator of the interactive session, to carry on the session. And due to constraint of time, you are requested to make the question session very shortcut. Over to Sri Debashish Sarangi.
Thank you very much, sir. First, I would like to congratulate and thanks to K.O. Narayan Rao, sir. So there are many questions, but I will ask one or two among them. There are 5-6 questions from Pragya Madam, and I will ask one or two among them. Do the thinkers advocating animal rights place animals and some of humans like infants, comatose, etc. in the same category? Hello?
I have said that while defining persons, I have made the point clear that the idea of persons can be extended to higher order animals like chimpanzees, gorillas, apes, monkeys, etc. Now, they may be treated as persons on one hand, who have human beings on the other hand, say for example the infants, the children, who cannot think, who cannot judge, or the people with who are mentally blank on the other hand. You see, these sort of people, they cannot be said to be persons in the right sense. But still, the problem is we give lot of weightage to the human species. May it be a small child or may it be a mentally blank individual. So the animals are animals. We say that they are driven by instincts. Well, that infant is very young. He will grow up. He has the mental faculties ready, and the time will come. He will also reason out. So that's how we take them. But as regarding the people who are mentally zero or who are mentally say ill or who are mentally challenged, but still they cannot be claimed to be called as persons. But still, the problem is we cannot subject them to say animal experimentation because of lot of legal issues. Okay, any killing of human being is a crime. You cannot subject to animal experimentation. That is a crime. But put that is various issues with time have to deal with. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So there are some questions. I'll put on this question on the group. So can we proceed now to second session?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hello. Due to the paucity of time, the questions are not being asked. Debashish, you do one thing, note the questions and put in the WhatsApp group so that I can answer, if possible.
Yes,
okay,
yes,
thank you. Thank you everybody for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you. Thank you very much.
Debashish, please offer vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Rao sir, for presenting nicely the animal rights before us. So I would like to thank all the participants for their patience hearing. Now it's time to welcome next speaker on human rights, I think. Bye. Yeah.
Okay. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, Debashish, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible. You are audible.
Okay. Then it's time to move to the second session, where Dr. Kalyan Sarangi, our next speaker, is waiting off. And today she will speak on the human rights and particularly biomedical ethics. Uh, then it's my humble privilege to introduce all. Dr. Kalyan Sarangi is now serving as director in philosophy, Kamal Nehru Women's College, Malaysia. He has more than 23 years of teaching experience in different colleges and universities in Malaysia. It's my privilege also to place her academic and teaching record for the knowledge of our learned participants. Dr. Kalyan Sarangi completed her post-graduation in the year 1992 and MPhil in the year 1994 from Purkal University and proved her academic excellence in both the exams. She happens to be 1 year junior to me. She completed her PhD under the able guidance of Professor Saroj Kumar Mohanty in the year 2002. Dr. Kalyan Sarangi joined as an assistant professor in logical philosophy in a central government institute hall, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, Government of India. She served there for more than 13 years. Then she resigned from service and joined as a reader in philosophy in the postgraduate department of philosophy University for 2 years. Then Dr. Sarangi joined as assistant professor of philosophy in Kisi University, Bhubaneswar, and served there for another 2 years. He has also worked as an assistant professor of philosophy in the Department of Philosophy and Religion in Sri University, Sri University for 1.5 years. Then Dr. resigned from her engagement and joined in Gop College Puri after being selected by State Selection Board. Dr. Sarangi worked at Gop College for more than 4 years after being serving as a lecturer in philosophy there. Now, Dr. Sarangi is working in Kamala Nehru Women's College, Bhubaneswar as an assistant a professor of philosophy. To her credits, Dr. Kalyan Sarangi has contributed many articles to different national level journals. Dr. Sarangi has written one book on lost logic, which has gained popularity among the students of logic in our state. Dr. Sarangi is also a story writer in Odia. Many of her stories are being published in different newspapers and journals Odisha. And with this, I would like to conclude my introductory address on Dr. Sarangi, and I request Dr. Sarangi to speak on the scheduled topic biomedical ethics. Over to Dr. Sarangi.
Thank you, Kailash, for your nice words. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, you are audible.
Namaskar to all of you. Revered members of the revered senior members of the philosophy family, respected members of the organizing committee, respected coordinator of today's webinar program, Dr. Kailash Chandra Maharana sir, the speaker of the first session, Dr. K. Om Narayan Rao sir, and my dear Mr. Debashish Sarangi, for whom we are getting videos and many more things. He makes it he makes it possible for all of us, and my dear young members of the philosophy family. I'm really thankful to all of you for giving me this opportunity to interact with you and equally to learn from you. I am assigned with the topic human rights bracketed biomedical ethics. Okay. So to begin with, I can only say that rights are our entitlements. The rights of one implies the duty of the other. If the child has the right to education, then the parents have the duty to provide education to the child. So we can say that rights and duties are logically correlatives. With this framework, let us begin our discussion regarding biomedical ethics. Okay. So, every theoretical and practical exercise presupposes a philosophical framework and implies an ethical dimension. Further, ethical paradigms determine the moral worth of human actions. We do not at all bother about such action situations where the moral choice is very clear. On the other hand, if the action situations becomes a bit complex and of controversial nature, then it simply takes the form of ethical dilemmas. The moral agents becomes perplexed as what ought to do and what ought not to do. We do confront with many such situations in biomedical ethics. Bio means life, and therefore biomedical ethics means life ethics. One of the seminal issues in biomedical ethics is the moral relations between the patient and the professionals. It is not about how to treat the patients, rather how one should deal with the other fellow human beings, especially in matters of sickness, illness, dying, and death. In the present pandemic situation, it becomes more explicit. So, therefore, the slogan is hate the disease, not the diseased or the person. So, truth telling, confidentiality, and informed consent provide an ethical foundation for the physician patient relationship. Truth telling is the view which holds that every bit of truth is to be told. It has to be addressed from both physician and patient's perspective. It is the bounden duty, or you can say the moral obligation of the physician to tell the truth in details regarding the nature of the disease, the procedure of the treatment, the possibility of risks, and the amount of money that is required to carry out the whole process. As the patient has the right to life, therefore it becomes imperative on the part of the physician to speak the truth and the only truth, irrespective of the consequences. This Kantian model of truth telling may cost the life of the patient, which defeats the very purpose of physician-patient relationship. Here, the moot question is how to speak the truth. Whether the physician speak the truth straightforwardly or there is a way to speak the truth. Our great epic, Mahabharata, also makes rooms for truth telling. Nare ba Gunjare Ashwathama Hata. Yudhishthira already knew what was the truth, but he preferred to speak the truth in a twisted form to his guru Dronacharya. Similarly, truth telling in biomedical ethics becomes context specific. If truth telling is likely to bring down the moral and the psychophysical conditions of the patient, then truth is better not to be said than said. Keeping in mind the utilitarian's consequences, and here the consequence is the well-being of the patient, and the virtue ethicist moderation, lying may pass off as truth. Coming to the ground reality, we see that the physician takes no time to report the details of the patients to the state health department, but fails to inform when he is diagnosed with the same disease, how far it is justified. Truth telling also becomes an existential imperative for the patient. Knowledge of the truth prepares the patient psychologically and enables the patient to make necessary arrangements for the future of his immediate kith and kin. Truth telling as a moral principle is to be told to the patient gently, gradually, and in different stages. Confidentiality, on the other hand, holds that strict confidentiality ought to be maintained by the physicians in the interest of the patient. It is the obligation to maintain confidence of all information provided by a patient to the physician. Personal and professional information is communicated by patients with the expectation that such information will be kept confidential and not to be disclosed to the third person. This concept is an ancient one and is incorporated in both Charaka Samhita and Hippocratic Oath. Confidentiality, like privacy, is valued because it protects individual rights, yet it is different from privacy. Confidentiality is recognized as a prima facie duty and is morally binding on physicians unless it is in conflict with equal stronger duties. The new medical laws and guidelines are there to guide the physicians what to disclose and what to be kept in strict confidence. Still, the physician is confused where to draw the line as each patient possesses a unique personality. Both truth-telling and confidentialities, they are not absolute obligations. Both are two extremes and can be reconciled in informed consent. So let's come to know what is informed consent. Informed consent is the view that refers to the process of telling truth to the patient about the illness and involving him in decision making for the procedure of the treatment or for the proposed treatment. This is a crucial concept in medical practice in the present scenario. Patients should be informed fully about what it is to be done, why it is to be done, when it is to be done, and what amount of pain, risk, discomfort is involved in the process. It is based on two assumptions, that is right to life and right to know. But the irony of the situation is that the patient is provided with printed informed consent form, which is of many pages just before the operation, when the patient and the family members are worried, stressed, tensed, and scared. Further, they are advised only to put their signatures as only formalities. What to speak of reading and understanding of the consent form? This also posed many crucial and powerful questions for the medical professionals. How much information the physician is required to share in order to get patient's consent? What information is exactly needed for a patient to make a reasonable decision? So taking into account these three concepts, that is truth-telling, confidentiality, and informed consent, three models are developed to explain the relation between physician and patient. These are paternalism, individualism, reciprocal, or collegial model. The word paternalism is derived from the Latin word pater, means father. Therefore, this model advocates that the physician has to play a parental role while treating the patients. It is supported by the age-old practice, doctor knows the best. Further, it has two forms, engineering model and priestly model. Doctors are engineers and patients are biological machines. The physicians must be value-free and scientific in his approach. The model says so. But as we know, the physicians are neither magicians nor mechanics, nor the body parts are machines. Physicians are persons with values. The million-dollar question here is whether the society is in need of a good doctor or a skilled doctor. The value neutrality in engineering model of paternalism paves the path for the virtues of a good physician. The physician is a savior which emphasizes upon the importance of moral character of professionals. The virtuous physician is a person who creates hopes in the hopeless, and who encourages the patient to fight with the disease. And basically, the virtuous physician is always guided by the principle of benefiting all and harming none. So here the engineering model and the priestly model can be very well distinguished, distinguished by citing two things. That is, there is a difference between the robotic touch and the motherly touch or human touch. So the priestly model can create the human touch, and the engineering model just like a robot touching you. So coming to individualism, and individualism opposes to paternalism and upgrades the status of patients as persons with dignity, autonomy, freedom of will, choice, and decision. The person that resides in the patient that should be recognized. Both the models, they are one-sided only. There is the possibility of a middle path between these two extremes, as a treatment procedure requires a team effort. Therefore, the patient and the physician are as colleagues, cooperate each other, cooperating and discussing with each other in finding out the disease and curing the disease. This model respects the patient as an autonomous agent with a right to hold views, make choices. Even the patient is allowed to reject the treatment only with the consultation of the physician. Though there is a fiduciary relationship between the physician and the patient, because the physician has a specialized person, he has specialized training in medical sciences, yet the sole aim of the physician is to benefit the patient with his overall health. Besides this, there are certain burning issues that I want to highlight here so that we can think in a better way in biomedical ethics that draw the attention of philosophers, ethicists, legal experts, statesmen, and medical practitioners. These issues are euthanasia, organ donation, abortion, surrogate motherhood, and many more. Euthanasia means easy or happy death. It is a conscious effort on the part of an individual to help someone to have a happy and peaceful death. It stands for putting an end to life when life is no more meaningful and worth living. I want to cite a case here for the benefit of the students. Aruna Ramchandra Sabag, a junior nurse of a private hospital of Mumbai, was sexually assaulted in the basement of the hospital by a ward boy. The boy tried to strangle her with a dog chain, and because of the disruption of the oxygen supply, she went into coma or a vegetative state. Her social activist and journalist friend Pinky Birani filed a case in the Supreme Court of India for allowing her to die. After a long debate, in a landmark judgment, the Supreme Court legalized only passive euthanasia in India. Unfortunately, Aruna Sabag died of pneumonia after leading a vegetative life for 42 years in the year 2015. No doubt, euthanasia is a controversial and emotive topic. It can be of voluntary, non-voluntary, and involuntary, taking into account the consent given by the patient. Many a time, voluntary euthanasia is equated with suicide, but definitely it is not so. Problems arise in case of non-voluntary and involuntary cases of euthanasia. In both the cases, euthanasia is brought about without the consent of the patient. In non-voluntary euthanasia, patient is incapacitated to give consent. For example, brain dead people, or you can say that the mentally deranged persons, or you can talk about babies and small children where they cannot take the decision. Whereas in case of involuntary euthanasia, the patient does not give consent, though he is capable to do so. Either the patient has not been asked for, or he refrained from giving the consent because he has the desire to live on. In both the cases, it is the family members or the physician who have to exercise the ultimate choice in the best interest of the patient. Further, it can be, euthanasia can be active or passive. From the physician's point of view, it is active if it is carried out by administering lethal drugs or lethal injections by the physicians, and it is passive when the physician stops all the treatment and allows the patient to die. The whole issue is not only about the different forms of euthanasia and problems related to it, rather other things like limitations of the natural resources, food stocks, economic factors, availability of medical facilities, availability of beds in the hospitals should be taken into considerations. In case of organ donations, we also see plethora of moral issues. Organ donation are possible in two ways: cadaver donors, that means brain dead donors, and living donors. From the virtue ethics perspective, we have a moral obligation to donate our organs after our death, which may save the life of some other persons. But the gap between the demand for transplantations and supply of organs from cadavers is huge, and turned our attention towards the organs from living donors. Living donation is an opportunity to save a life while you are still living. The donor may be biologically related to the donee or unrelated to the donee. If it is due to selfless motives, social values, cultural upbringing, and compassion for humanity, then it is well and good. But you see, but if it becomes but it becomes a commercialization, if it is used for buying and selling of organs, then definitely it is illegal and unethical. Are we really free to sell our body parts as we are free to sell our livers? There is a beautiful film named Ship of Theseus, directed by Anand Gandhi. Navin, the character of the film, donated his kidney with large amount of financial incentives. He is happy with his one kidney only. Now the questions are, how much the compensation? He is compensated. Navin is compensated with a very handsome amount of money. But here the questions are, how much the compensation is adequate compensation? What are the parameters? Who is going to decide it? And so on. Further, it becomes worsen when fetuses are sold at very high price for stem cell research, illegal beauty treatments, and for other medicinal purposes. The fetus is allowed to grow for some weeks in the womb and then aborted. How far it is ethical to kill fetus only to look better and to think better? Again, in organ donation, when we are discussing organ donation, there is also an issue that strikes to my mind today only. If we look into the statistics of the participation of men and women in as donee and donor, this is really disheartening. See, the woman without a second thought donates her vital body part to save the person with whom she has an emotional bond. But the same reciprocity is not at all visible. I'm not giving the whole issue a feminist outlook, but still these two cannot be ignored. And if through organ donation, if either for the beauty purpose, that is simply very, very heinous and very, very horrorful also, I can say that the zygote just put into a mixture or a grinder, and paste is prepared, and that is applied in the face of a woman only to look better. So that is something that is highly condemned in the society, or we can, as the conscious moral beings, we can raise our voice also against it. This is also in huge practice, and in exchange, women are getting a very good amount of money. So if it is so, if it is allowed, if it is so, why do we condemn? If it is so, can we say abortion to be good? Because the child, the zygote is, the lady is mentally prepared to foster the zygote, and after some weeks of pregnancy, she is going for aborting the child and sold it with a huge money. So if you see, so if this is so, so can you say abortion to be good? No, not at all. Because if it is so, why do we condemn the act of girl feticide? Can we say it to be bad? No, not at all. Because it risks and even costs the life of would-be mother. Even there are countries where abortion is strictly prohibited. I will cite a case study here. A woman of Indian origin named Sabita Halpanbar, who was a dentist, succumbed to death in Ireland after being denied by her gynec not to perform abortion, as this is not permitted by the law of the land. So you see the pity of the situation of a woman. So here, because I am in a hurry because of the paucity of time, I could not be more elaborative. So here I wish to submit before all the noble participants that each case, whether it is a case of euthanasia, be it voluntary, involuntary, whatever it may be, or it is a case of organ donation, or it is all about abortion, going for abortion or not to go for abortion. Many reasons, social, economic, so many reasons are there. But each case should be treated as an end in itself, not as a means for some other end. Each case should be addressed from different angles, taking into account patient, physician, family members, society, and society at large. There are many and many gray areas rather than black and white areas. These gray areas should be taken into tasks, more research work to be done in these gray areas, which help us to analyze and to understand all the issues with the principle harm none and benefit all. I conclude by saying that nature heals, doctor treats, and God cures. Thank you. Thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Uh, Hello. Thanks so much, Dr. Kalyani, for your very clear exposition on the scheduled topic, biomedical ethics. And you have very cleverly and intelligibly discussed the issues of biomedical ethics. And through your presentation, you have reflected different ethical problems relating to euthanasia, abortion, surrogacy, organ donation, by means of current examples, which are very interesting for the audience and the viewers. Now, your presentation is open for interaction session. Here in interaction session, Devas Karangi, our moderator, is here to reflect all the questions put in the chat box. Over to say Devas Charangi for moderating the question session.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And I would like to first congratulate Madam for his nice explanation on the given topic. So there are a few questions in the chat box. I'll read them one by one. First question is from Ratnakar Gajendra, sir. He wants to know doctor-patient relationship talks of truth-telling and confidentiality. In Upanishads, it is mentioned, Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya. The collective happiness is the motto of these scriptures. Do you agree with it? Please justify your statement. he wants to know. Yeah.
Sir, namaskar. Okay, this doctor-patient relationship, yes, it keeps harmony with this Upanishadic thought. Because you see, when a patient is suffering, undergoing suffering, the moral obligation, it is the duty, you can say, it is the duty of the patient, of the physician to restore his normal health. So, whatever the doctor does, that whatever the doctor is allowed to do, it is only for the best interest of the patient. It is only keeping in the best interest of the patient, keeping the situation into account, what is best suited to that situation, the doctor opts for that. So it is not a one-man army, it is not a one-man decision, rather the family members, the friends, all taken into, all are consulted and taken into this crucial decision making, and it is always for the best interest of the patient. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Then the next question is from Ajit Kumar Nath, sir. He wants to know patient's confidentiality is a priority, but should a medical practitioner notify if a person suffers from a infectious disease like COVID or HIV and became a danger to society?
Yes, of course. That's a very good question. Uh, Thank you. You talk about STD or of HIV or the present horrifying disease, you can say COVID-19. Immediately, it should be reported. Immediately. The doctor, you see, there are, because of the paucity of time, I could not elaborate, I could not cite some cases. But here, you see, suppose a person is affected by STD. STD means sexually transmitted disease. Suppose the patient requests the doctor not to disclose with his spouse, but it is, can you say that it is morally right? No. So from that point of view, from the society's point of view, if there is, if the possibility is that the disease is going to affect the other, is going to affect the interest of the others, so there only the doctor has to surpass. So there is a very clear-cut guidelines which is not required that all things the patient shared with the doctor, every act of commission should be kept in confidence. No, if for a better interest, for the benefit of the society, for a greater cause, if it is demanding, the doctor has to deviate, and he has to disclose it to the concerned health department. That becomes, you can say that that becomes a moral obligation of the doctor, of the physician.
Thank you, ma'am. Then Nanda Ghosh wants to know the perspective of practical, from the perspective of practical ethics, each situation is to be treated in totally different way. As you have mentioned, the gray areas need to be researched well. But he wants to know, can we ever be able to categorize these gray areas?
Yes, we can see there are what, first of all, we have to understand what are the gray areas. The gray areas means there are number of alternatives, you see. So we can conduct directly, we can go to that situation. Suppose you can talk about in euthanasia, there the gray area is regarding to involuntary euthanasia. Because here the patient wants to live. I can very well, I can explain to you. Suppose you have a 99 years old granny in your family. Whenever you pay her a visit and you asked her that, yes, you have led a very beautiful life, happy life, and do you want a peaceful death? No, no, no. Who told you? I want to see the marriage of your child. Again, after the marriage of your child, again you approach. No, no, I want to see so and so thing. So you see, this is a very everybody wants to live. But the question is that everybody wants to live with dignity. That is the very important question. That is the reason for which nowadays we do talk of euthanasia and of different forms of euthanasia. So here, in case of involuntary euthanasia, particularly, I am talking of involuntary euthanasia. Here, the patient is neither the patient is not asked for, or you can say that if the patient deliberately refrains from giving the consent because there is a desire to live on. So how we can do justice to such cases. So definitely the areas has to be located and more research has to be done. But though I have already told that each situation should be taken as an end, not as a means for any other thing. But doing research, we can come to some standards, something that is common. So we can address how to we must learn how to address these commonalities in all these gray areas. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Then Pragya Daskanungo wants to know which model can be followed while treating a patient with COVID.
Pardon me, repeat it, please. Let me see.
Yeah, she wants to know which model can be followed while treating a patient with COVID.
Let me. Which, pardon me, which?
Which model can be followed while treating a COVID patient?
Which model means the paternalism or what? She wants to exactly, she has to make the question clear. Whether it is, I think she is asking for paternalism or individualism, or that is the reason for which I say that both you talk about the paternalism model or you talk about the individual model, they are only one-sided. One in paternalism, you see, we are just over giving. We are just over emphasizing the physicians and undermining the patients. So that is the reason for which we say that doctor knows the best. But on the other hand, in individualism, individualistic model, we undermining the role of the physician and we just over emphasizing the role of the individual because it is the body of the individual that is affected. So the individual has the autonomy, so on and so forth. But I can say that we can come to a middle path. That is the reciprocal model. It should be appreciable, or even even the reciprocal model also. You see, the reciprocal model uh, gives scope for the virtuous physician who can create, who by his magical words, by his soothing words, by his simply, you see, suppose there is a hopeless person, there is a person who just lose all hope that he or she will continue. If the doctor simply will pat on the back and say that yes, you can, so that creates hope. That also encourage, because you know all the diseases they are psychosomatic disorder, and if so, first we need the mental strength so that we can fight with the disorder in the physical level. So I can say that the reciprocal model is always an appreciable model.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question is from K. Om Narayan Rao sir. He wants to know there are arguments to suggest that the women who are permitted to go for abortion are less likely to suffer from mental illness and depression. How do you see this issue?
Okay, just a minute. I am just going through his question. There are arguments to suggest that the women who are permitted to go for abortion are less likely to suffer from mental illness and depression. How do you see this issue? We cannot, sorry, we cannot, because I want to elaborate more on abortion. Because of the paucity of time, I just skipped so many things regarding to this issue. but we cannot, I think we cannot generalize. Because you see, suppose there is a woman when after the conception, she thought that it is the part of my body. Even after abortion, she just enter into the world of depression as if she lost her identity, she lost her dignity, she lost a very important part of herself only. And there are persons who can very easily go for abortion, sex determinations before the birth of the child, and if they are in favor of not in favor of girl child, they can go for abortion, and they took it just as it is nothing but a change in bodily feature. Or you see how you perceive, this is all depends upon your perception, how you perceive the whole situation, whether you can say that whether the very zygote belongs to me, or he is a part of me. Definitely after losing, definitely there will be depression, and there will be mental illness. uh, if not so, then you can take in a very lighter mood. So this is the way how you perceive the whole situation.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. As I think this question is a kind of gender hierarchy, that most of the people think that the women are more emotional and the men are more rational, like that, and there is a binary between the emotion and reason.
No, no,
Uh,
Mr. Francis,
yeah,
pardon me. I want to his question only, to K.M. Narayan Rao sir's questions. I can cite a very good case study here. And you see, in Madhya Pradesh, uh, many very advanced cities, they are famous for infanticide, that is particularly girl infanticide, foeticide. And in Madhya Pradesh, a private hospital uh, was charged with this issue, and the police in charge, they are many times they visited the hospital, but they are unable to find a trace of it. And finally, a lady officer, she got pregnant, and she visited the hospital. Then only everything come to the limelight. Which I want to see, I share here only. You see, so if any couple, rather I should say couple, approach the owner of these hospitals, both the couples, they were doctors, they were gynecs, and whenever any couple approach them, they just by a discussion, they just get to know whether they want to abort or they want to keep the zygote or keep the fetus. And only after, if it is a case of abortion, you will be surprised, and you will be it's a whenever I am just sharing with you, you see my things are only, it is I want to pinch myself to be in reality. So you see, whenever the any couple, they just approach both the doctors for abortion, they had greyhound dogs. Okay, they just take out the zygote from the mother's womb and put it fresh before the dog, and the dog eats up. So every time the police officers they visited, they were unable to find out a trace of it. Only after a, because there were many and many complaints against the private hospital. So it is only so after that the a lady officer, she got pregnant, and everything came to the limelight. You see, this is the situation. So you see, whenever I'm sharing it with you, I feel the pinch, but there are people who the physician couples, the lady the lady gynac is there, but she took it in a very lighter vein. So it all depends how you perceive the whole situation. It all depends upon the mindset, or you can say that how you perceive the whole situation. That's the that's my submission rather.
thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much for your lucid presentation on this topic and for an engaging lecture. So thank you very much, ma'am. And so it's over to Kailash sir. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Yes,
Hello.
sir. Yes, sir.
Hello. Audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible. Yes.
So on behalf of Philosophy family, I extend my gratitude to Dr. Kalyani Sharangi for her brilliant, clear presentation on the pertinent issues of the present time. And hearty thanks to Dr. Omnaran Rao and Dr. Kalyani for making the evening webinar a grand success. And my thanks goes to Debasis who has taken all the responsibility to make the webinar successful and has taken a greater responsibility to share this webinar series to the YouTube. Thank you very much. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, sir.